Hey, welcome to another video. So today I've just made an entire compilation of the entire Dance of the Dragons for you to sit back and enjoy at your own convenience. So let's just jump straight into it. King Viserys Targaryen had 3 children by his first queen, Aemma Arryn, but only one, Princess Rhaenyra, survived to adulthood. Lacking a son to succeed him, Viserys began to train Rhaenyra to be his heir. Young Rhaenyra was included in discussions of the affairs of state, and was allowed to participate in meetings of the small council. Many of the nobles took note, and Rhaenyra soon acquired a clique of adherents and supporters. After the passing of Queen Aemma in 105 AC, Viserys named Rhaenyra his heir, and hundreds of lords and landed knights paid obeisance to her. Viserys' declaration disregarded precedents from 92 AC to 101 AC. The king remarried in 106 AC, this time to Alicent Hightower, and had 4 more children, Aegon, Helaena, Aemond, and Daeron. In 111 AC, a great tournament was held at King's Landing on the 5th anniversary of Viserys' marriage to Alicent. During the opening feast, Queen Alicent wore a green gown, while Princess Rhaenyra dressed in red and black of House Targaryen. Note was taken, and thereafter it became the custom to refer to greens and blacks when talking about the Queen's party and the party of the princess, respectively. Wearing Rhaenyra's favor, Sir Criston Cole unhorsed all of Alicent's champions in the tournament, including 2 of her cousins and her youngest brother, Sir Gawain Hightower. Viserys I strengthened Rhaenyra's place in the succession by marrying her in 114 AC to Sir Laenor Velaryon, who had Targaryen blood through his mother, Princess Rhaenys. The marriage caused a falling out between Rhaenyra and Criston. Rhaenyra gave birth to 3 sons, Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey Velaryon. During her marriage, although there were rumors that the father of these princes was not Laenor, but Sir Harwin Strong. After Laenor was murdered in Spicetown in 120 AC, Rhaenyra married her uncle, Prince Daemon Targaryen, younger brother to King Viserys. Her sons by him were Aegon the Younger, called so to distinguish him from his uncle, Alicent's Aegon, who on occasion was called Aegon the Elder, and Viserys. The relationship between Rhaenyra and Alicent declined early in Alicent's marriage to Viserys, since both ladies had been trying to be the realm's first lady, and there could only be one. As a consequence of their bad relation, Alicent's sons did not take to Rhaenyra's sons. Alicent's father, Sir Otto Hightower, had also disliked Rhaenyra's second husband, Prince Daemon, since the beginning of Viserys' reign. Upon the death of King Viserys I Targaryen, Queen Alicent and Lord Commander Criston Cole sent out the Kingsguard to summon the small council members. During the gathering, the conversation quickly stirred towards Rhaenyra's coronation, but Sir Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King, told those who had gathered that Prince Aegon the Elder would be crowned, while Lord Lyman Beesbury, the Master of Coin, insisted Rhaenyra should be crowned as the Queen. Several other council members countered Lord Beesbury. Sir Tywin Lannister argued that the oaths made to Rhaenyra in 105 AC had not been made by them, since it had been 24 years. Lord Jasper Wilde mentioned that the old King Jaehaerys twice chose a male heir over the female heir and her descendants, and Sir Otto argued that Rhaenyra was married to Prince Daemon, who would become the true ruler, should Rhaenyra gain the crown. Both Hightowers argued that not only they, but also Alicent's children, would die should Rhaenyra become their queen. According to Septon Eustace, Sir Criston convinced a reluctant Prince Aegon to accept the crown, because his mother, brothers, sister, and children would otherwise be killed by Rhaenyra. Grand Maester Orwell predicted a war, believing that Rhaenyra would never be willing to give up her birthright, and had dragons at her disposal. When Lyman declared he was not willing to listen to people plotting to steal her crown and attempted to leave. According to Grand Maester Orwell, who was present in the chamber, Otto then ordered the arrest and confinement of Lyman Beesbury of the Black Cells, where he died of a chill. In contrast, Eustace claims Criston cut the throat of Lyman with a dagger, while the Fool Mushroom alleges that Criston instead flung Lyman to his death from a window. Neither Eustace or Mushroom was present at the meeting, however. This made Lord Beesbury the first casualty of the Dance of the Dragons, although if you watched the show, you saw that it was Criston Cole who killed Lyman Beesbury. After the death of Lyman Beesbury, the Green Council made their plans, vowing their loyalty to the new king and arresting all those in King's Landing who could be loyal to Rhaenyra. To all those who might be loyal to Aegon, ravens were sent. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra remained on Dragonstone, completely unaware of what had happened. After the Green Small Council, Prince Aemond was sent to Storm's End to betroth himself to one of Lord Boros Baratheon's daughters, so House Baratheon might fight for Aegon II. By the time he left, the smell coming from Viserys I's room was all over Maegor's Holdfast. 7 days after Viserys had died, his death was announced to King's Landing, and the Silent Sisters were sent for. Aegon's coronation was hastily prepared. The Dragon Pit was chosen as the site for its towering bronze doors, strong roof, and thick walls made it easily defensible. Sir Criston Cole crowned Aegon, while Alicent Hightower crowned Aegon's sister wife Helaena. The night before, however, the first defection had taken place. Sir Steffon Darklyn of the Kingsguard had left the city with, among other things, the crown worn by King Jaehaerys and Viserys. On Dragonstone, Rhaenyra had learned about the death of her father and the betrayal of her siblings. Anger made her go into labor, which lasted for 3 days, and brought forth a stillborn, deformed girl, whom Rhaenyra named Visenya. In answer to Aegon's betrayal and the death of her daughter, Rhaenyra swore revenge. Rhaenyra made her own council at Dragonstone, the Black Council. Participants included her uncle husband Daemon, her 3 eldest sons Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey, Lord Corlys Velaryon and his wife, Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, as well as others. During the council, some observed the amount of fighting-sized dragons at Dragonstone, 9 tamed and 3 wild, outnumbered those of the Greens in King's Landing, which only had 4, and suggested they should attack the city at once. However, Rhaenyra pointed out that they only had 5 available dragon riders, as she was not yet recovered enough to fly, and that 3 of those riders would be her sons. She noted that since one of the green dragons was Vhagar, 5 to 4 was no advantage. Prince Daemon agreed with his wife, and suggested there were better ways to use dragons. He recommended that they should be having a public coronation of Rhaenyra to match Aegon's, and then to try and win the war with words before battle, seeking supporters among the great lords of the realm. Princess Rhaenys was convinced that Storm's End would declare for Rhaenyra, since Lord Bormund Baratheon, the deceased father of Lord Boros, had always been a supporter of his niece Rhaenys. Prince Daemon was also convinced that Lady Jane Arryn would bring the support of the Vale to their side, and that Lord Dalton Greyjoy of the Iron Islands might also be persuaded to support Rhaenyra. Though the council believed the North to be too remote to play an important part of the war, messages were to be sent to these lords nonetheless. Instead of ravens, Rhaenyra's 3 eldest sons volunteered to serve as envoys to these lords, flying on their dragons to prove themselves as true Targaryens. She forbade Joffrey from going, as he was only 11, but allowed Jacaerys and Lucerys to go only after they swore upon the 7-pointed star to be but messengers, not knights, and to take part in no fighting. Jacaerys was to fly on Vermax to the Arryns of the Eyrie, the Manderleys of White Harbor, and the Starks of Winterfell, and the younger Lucerys was to travel in Arrax to Storm's End. It was also resolved that while Rhaenyra remained at Dragonstone to regain her health, Prince Daemon and Caraxes would travel to the Riverlands to make Harrenhal their base and rallying point for the river lords loyal to Rhaenyra. House Velaryon would close off the gullet, blocking all ships from Blackwater Bay. Rhaenyra was crowned queen, using the crown of her father and great-grandfather, thanks to Sir Steffon Darklyn, who had brought it from King's Landing. Prince Daemon placed the crown on Rhaenyra's head himself, and was named Protector of the Realm, and Jacaerys was officially named the Prince of Dragonstone and heir to the Iron Throne. As her first act as queen, Rhaenyra declared Sir Otto Hightower and Dowager Queen Alicent traitors and rebels, but allowed for her half-siblings to be spared and forgiven if they would bend the knee, since the kinslayer is accursed. Upon hearing of his half-sister's coronation, King Aegon declared Rhaenyra and Daemon traitors and demanded their execution. However, Grandmaster Orwell wished to parley and avoid war, and his proposal was supported by Alicent and Helaena. The king was persuaded by his mother and sister wife, and Orwell was dispatched to Dragonstone with a retune under a peace banner, offering Rhaenyra generous terms. The terms stated that if Rhaenyra were to bend the knee to King Aegon II, he would confirm her possession of Dragonstone and allow it to pass to her heir, Jacaerys. Her second son, Lucerys, would be recognized as the heir to Driftmark, and her youngest sons would be made the king's squire and cupbearer. Pardons would also be granted to the other Black lords and knights. However, Queen Rhaenyra asked Orwell if he remembered that King Viserys had confirmed her as the heir and successor, and rejected the terms. She also declared that Orwell was no true Grand Maester, and took his chain of office and gave it to her own maester, Jaredus. Sending Orwell in his return back to King's Landing, she told him to tell Aegon that she would have her throne or his head. Not much is known about Blood's past, and his real name is lost to history. All that is known about him is that he was a butcher as well as a sergeant of the Gold Cloaks, the city watch of King's Landing. After he brutally murdered a whore while in a drunken rage, he was stripped of his gold cloak and dismissed from the city watch. Blood began to spend time in Flea Bottom, the poorest part of King's Landing. Cheese's past is a complete mystery, along with his name, which, along with Blood's, is lost to history. At an unknown point, he was hired as a rat catcher. According to Mushroom, the court fool, Cheese became really familiar with the secret halls, hidden doors, and tunnels that had been secretly built throughout the Red Keep during the reign of Maegor, the first Targaryen. So, going into the instant of Blood and Cheese according to the books first, after Prince Lucerys Velaryon was murdered by his uncle Prince Aemond, which made the latter a kinslayer, Rhaenyra Targaryen, Lucerys' mother, collapsed in grief. In response to his nephew's death, Daemon Targaryen, Rhaenyra's husband/uncle, who is away at Harrenhal in the Riverlands, sends her a message via a raven that her son would be avenged. Through his spy master Mysaria, Blood and Cheese were employed to kill one of the sons of King Aegon II. Thanks to Cheese's knowledge of the Red Keep's secrets, the duo was able to infiltrate the Red Keep through a forgotten passageway. Cheese then led Blood into the heart of the Red Keep, successfully avoiding the guards. Reaching the Tower of the Hand, they crept up through the walls before slipping into the chambers of Dowager Queen Alicent Hightower. There they bound and gagged her, while Blood strangled her bedmaid to death. Blood and Cheese then waited for the arrival of Queen Helaena Targaryen and her children, as the two assassins knew that it was the queen's custom of taking her children to see their grandmother before putting them to bed every evening. That night, when Helaena arrived with her 3 children, Blood killed her guard before proceeding to grab her eldest son, Prince Jaehaerys, while Cheese took hold of her younger son, Prince Maelor. Though Blood warned Helaena that she and her children would die if she screamed, it is said that the queen remained calm. When she demanded the identity of the 2 assassins, Cheese stated that he and Blood are debt collectors, and that a debt has been owed, an eye for an eye, a son for a son. But he assured Helaena that neither she nor anyone else would be killed. When he asked her which of her sons she wanted them to kill, the queen pleaded with them to kill her instead, which was turned down, and Blood reminds her that it has to be his son. Cheese warns Helaena that Blood will rape her daughter, Princess Jaehaera, out of boredom, if she doesn't make a choice soon. When she was once again forced to make an impossible choice, under the threat that all her children would be killed, the queen tearfully chose Maelor. It is unknown why Queen Helaena chose her youngest son over the eldest. She believed that Maelor was too young to understand, or maybe it's because Prince Jaehaerys was the king's firstborn son and heir. Seeing that she had chosen Maelor, Cheese whispered to the boy's ear, mockingly saying, "You hear that, little boy? Your mama wants you dead." He then grins at Blood, who signals the hulking man to kill Prince Jaehaerys, in which he decapitated the boy with a single swing of his sword, to Queen Helena's horror, and she began to scream. Blood and Cheese fled with Prince Jaehaerys' head, and they evaded capture from the castle guards by once again using the Red Keep's secret passageways. 2 days later, when attempting to escape King's Landing, Blood was seized at the Gate of the Gods, while Jaehaerys' head was found hidden in one of Blood's saddle sacks. While being tortured, Blood revealed that he intended to take the prince's head to Harrenhal, where he would collect his reward from Prince Daemon. He further gave a description of Mysaria, but didn't reveal her identity. Blood died 13 days later. The City Watch and their commander, Sir Luther Largent, searched all throughout King's Landing for Mysaria and Cheese, but the two were nowhere to be found. Due to having witnessed her eldest son's death, Queen Helaena was left entirely broken on the inside and outside, and she immediately fell into depression while slowly descending into madness, eliminating her as a dragon rider. She even went as far as to intolerate the presence of Prince Maelor, for she had chosen him to die, though Jaehaerys was killed instead. King Aegon, in rage and grief over the death of his eldest son, combined with his paranoia, immediately ordered all the rat catchers in King's Landing to be hanged, and the hand of the king, Otto Hightower, had to replace them with 100 cats. The assassination of Prince Jaehaerys by Blood and Cheese had a strong negative effect on not only House Targaryen, but also nearly all of Westeros. At this event is what ultimately led to the beginning of open war between the Blacks, the supporters of Rhaenyra, and the Greens. Later, the death of Prince Jaehaerys alongside Prince Maelor, who died during the Dance of the Dragons. would come to have a lasting impact on Rhaenyra herself, as the death of both the young princes is one of the main reasons the small folk and the shepherd rose in a riot against Rhaenyra, who was also accused of murdering Queen Helaena, who actually committed suicide. Like his novel counterpart, nothing is known about Blood's past nor his real name. All that is known is that he joined and began serving House Targaryen as a member of the Gold Cloaks and developed a strong dislike of House Hightower, while Cheese's past is also unknown along with his name. All that is known is that he was an indebted gambler who served the Targaryen household as a rat catcher, and as he worked, he became familiar with the secret tunnels and passageways that were built on the orders of King Maegor the Cruel. So, in House of the Dragon, following the death of Lucerys Velaryon, after he was accidentally killed by Prince Aemon Targaryen, Rhaenyra Targaryen was left devastated and enraged. Harboring a strong hatred for Aemon for her son's death, she vengefully declares her desire to have him die as payback. Secretly smuggling himself to King's Landing, Daemon bribes Blood, who is busy doing his service as a gold cloak, into letting him into the capital. They then meet Cheese as part of Flea Bottom. Daemon hires them both to kill Prince Aemon, but if they fail to find him, then they had to kill a son for a son, as Daemon seeks to avenge Lucerys' death. Though he only paid them half of the money he owes them, he promised to pay the remainder of the bribe if they bring him the son's head. Having grown familiar with the secret tunnels that were built by Maegor the Cruel, Cheese, accompanied by his dog, used the passageways to lead Blood into the Red Keep. They pass through the castle's kitchen, and then the throne room, where Aegon II is busy drinking and talking with his cronies. As they go through another secret passageway, Cheese hesitates and admits he doesn't know how to navigate the upper floors, and he fears that they'll be suspected if they walk around the royal chambers. He was forced into doing so after being threatened by Blood. Though Cheese tells him that he knew of a secret stairway that led to the royal floors, he warns Blood that once they get there, he won't know his way around. As they moved on, Blood cruelly kicks away Cheese's dog. When they reach the royals' floor through a secret door, Blood and Cheese split up in their search for Aemond. When Blood goes to lay out rat traps, he was caught by a handmaid, and he tells her that he was laying out traps for the rats. Apparently not believing him, she immediately fled with Blood, turned around and lay out the traps. Alarmed by this, the latter, after setting up the traps, goes to look for the maid, but she is already gone, and he knew that it would only be a matter of time until the castle guards are roused. While looking for Cheese, he suddenly hears a commotion from nearby, and finds Cheese holding his knife to Queen Helaena Targaryen's neck. Not recognizing her, Blood demands Cheese on who she is, and the rat catcher reveals her identity. Thinking that Cheese wants to kill her, he reminds him of Daemon's order, but Cheese points across the room, and Blood finds Prince Jaehaerys and his sister Princess Jaehaera sleeping in their beds. However, as the two appeared to look the same, Blood and Cheese couldn't tell which of them is Jaehaerys. Wanting to rush immediately before the guards are alerted, Blood correctly claims that Queen Helaena knows which of the two children is her son, and Cheese forces her to point the son out, threatening to bleed the hell out of her and her children if she refused. A terrified Helaena tries to offer them her necklace, claiming it is of value. Though Blood takes it, he nevertheless rejects it, telling her that the necklace is not a son. Seeing Cheese continue to threaten her with his knife, the queen, knowing she could only save her daughter, Jaehaera, reluctantly points to her sleeping son. Blood seems to believe her until he thinks that Princess Jaehaera is Prince Jaehaerys, assuming that Helaena is trying to trick them. However, Cheese knew that the queen is being honest, so they let her go. While Blood covers Jaehaerys' mouth to prevent the boy from screaming loudly, Queen Helaena, watching in horror as Blood and Cheese murder her son, goes to get Princess Jaehaera from her bed just as the two assassins murder Jaehaerys. As she quietly scooped her daughter up and fled the room, Blood and Cheese began removing Jaehaerys' head. Reaching Alicent Hightower's chambers, where she is making love with Sir Criston Cole, Helaena collapsed onto the floor with her daughter in her arms, and she reveals to her mother that her son was killed, leaving Alicent in shock. Blood and Cheese successfully escaped the Red Keep undetected, while Cheese remained in King's Landing, presumably to lay low. Blood decided to flee from the capital so he could deliver Prince Jaehaerys' head to Prince Daemon. Meanwhile, as the Greens and their council had received word of Jaehaerys' assassination, all of the castle servants were forcibly rounded up for interrogation, while the Gold Cloaks were put on high alert and security was heightened. Upon learning of his son's murder, King Aegon flew into a violent rage and immediately declared war on Rhaenyra, as he believed her to be responsible for it. At the Gate of the Gods, Blood was eventually caught while escaping and Jaehaerys' head was found in a sack. The former was then taken to the dungeons, where Larys Strong will interrogate him through torture. Before the Master of Whisperers could even begin, Blood, consumed with fear, immediately confessed that he and Cheese were paid half by Daemon Targaryen and half for completing the task. In addition, he revealed to Larys that he was assisted by a rat catcher, who was hired by the royal household, but he admits he doesn't know the man's real name. When Blood fearfully asks Larys if he's going to hurt him, the latter says he isn't, and he also is not going to vouch for King Aegon. Blood was shocked and even more terrified when Aegon II entered his cell, before the latter eventually kills him with a mace. As he was informed that Blood was helped by a rat catcher, Aegon executes all of the rat catchers in the Red Keep's employ, before having their bodies hung from the castle's ramparts. However, unbeknownst to King Aegon, Cheese was among the executed rat catchers. Thus, with his and Blood's death, Prince Jaehaerys' murder was avenged. The actions of Blood and Cheese, alongside Prince Daemon, would come to damage Rhaenyra's reputation and cause. Sir Otto Hightower began spreading the false belief that Rhaenyra is responsible for Prince Jaehaerys' murder in an attempt to turn the public against her, which ended up working, as during Jaehaerys' funeral procession, Queen Helaena had received an overwhelming amount of sympathy from the small folk, who began to denounce Rhaenyra as a kinslayer, with a man even nicknaming her the Monstrous. However, this would soon fade away when King Aegon executed all the rat catchers, which earned him the hatred of countless small folk, including the families of the executed rat catchers. When the murder and funeral of Prince Jaehaerys reached Dragonstone, Rhaenyra was horrified to learn that she is blamed for the princeling's death. Though she ordered for ravens to be sent out to the realm with the message of denying the allegations, her maester, Gerardus, tells her that denial would not be received in good faith. Lord Bartimus Celtigar, Rhaenyra's master of coin, adds in that the Black's position is greatly damaged as a result of the assassination, and Sir Alfred Broom believes it would not be long for an aggrieved mother to seek revenge for her son's death. Rhaenyra refutes this and states that she doesn't bear any ill will towards Helaena before discovering Prince Daemon is likely the true culprit. She confronts him in private, and Daemon admits his responsibility for Jaehaerys' death. Rhaenyra angrily notes that the boy's death had weakened her claim to the Iron Throne, and she now had to struggle with raising her own armies to support her in battle. She ultimately came to distrust her uncle/husband, and sees his loyalty as questionable at best. After the death of Lucerys Velaryon and Jaehaerys Targaryen, both sides called for vengeance. Lords called their banners and marched their armies. At the start of the war, Grover Tully, the Lord Paramount of the Trident, wanted to support King Aegon II and the Greens, but he was too old and bedridden to act. His grandson and heir Sir Elmo Tully, who preferred the claim of Rhaenyra Targaryen and the Blacks, kept the Tully banners at Riverrun instead. The forces of Lord Samuel Blackwood, who had declared for Rhaenyra, invaded the lands of the Green-aligned Lord Humphrey Bracken, putting villages and crops to the torch and despoiling septs. The Bracken forces, under the command of Sir Amos Bracken, were surprised by the Blackwoods while on the march to retaliate. Amos slew Lord Blackwood in single combat during the ensuing battle, and was himself slain by an arrow soon after. The Brackens were ultimately defeated in the Battle of the Burning Mill. The survivors turned back to Stonehenge, now commanded by Amos' half-brother, Sir Raylan Rivers, only to find it had been seized when Lord Bracken and his family by Prince Daemon and a host of rivermen in their absence. The Brackens yielded, and thus King Aegon lost his last supporter of any strength in the Riverlands. These victories allowed the River Lords, such as the Blackwoods, to begin to gather at Harrenhal and join Daemon's growing banners. Sir Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King, took to winning over lords, hiring sellswords, strengthening the defenses of King's Landing, and seeking other alliances. He sent ravens to Winterfell, the Erie, Riverrun, White Harbor, Goldtown, Bitterbridge, Fair Isle, and 100 other seats. He sent riders to the holdings closer to the capital, to summon their lords and ladies to court to do fealty to King Aegon. He also reached out to Dorne, which had fought against Daemon in the war for the Stepstones, but Prince Corin Martell refused to take part. The fall of Harrenhal and the defeats at the Burning Mill and Stonehenge made Aegon II fearful. His fears deepened when ravens returned from the Reach, where the Greens thought themselves the strongest. As House Hightower of Oldtown and House Redwyne of the Arbor stood firmly behind the king, the Lords Costawayne of Three Towers, Mullendore of Uplands, Tarly of Hornhill, Rowan of Golden Grove, and Grim of Greyshield declared for Rhaenyra. Such division led to the Castellans, steward and mother of the Lord Lionel Tyrell, in their role as regents, to refuse to take part. Sir Otto sent word to his nephew, Lord Ormond Hightower, to put down the rebellions in the Reach. More blows came to King Aegon II in the form of rejections from the Vale, the North, and the constant complaints of merchants for the closing of Blackwater Bay by the Sea Snake's fleets. With his overtures to Dalton Greyjoy ignored, Sir Otto believed that Daemon was Rhaenyra's greatest weakness, and reached out to an old foe of Daemon's in the Kingdom of the Three Daughters, sending envoys promising exclusive trading rights at King's Landing, as well as ceding the Stepstones, even though the Iron Throne had never claimed them, if they would clear the gullet of the Velaryon fleet. The Triarchy was slow to move, however, as all important decisions were left in the hands of the High Council. The delay did not sit well with Aegon II, who dismissed his grandfather as Hand and turned to Sir Criston Cole. Sir Criston Cole's first advice to the king was to treat those who denied him fealty as traitors. Thus all the blacks imprisoned in the dungeons were dragged to the Red Keep's yard before the king's justice and his axe. Each prisoner was given a last chance to swear fealty to King Aegon. Only Lords Butterwell, Stokeworth, and Rossby bent the knee to Aegon, while Lords Hayford, Merryweather, Harte, Buckler, Caswell, and Lady Fell remained true to their vows to defend Rhaenyra's rights, and they were beheaded along with 8 landed knights and 20 servants and retainers. Their heads were mounted on spikes above the gates of King's Landing. Not even the Kingsguard were unaffected by the dance. The 7 sworn brothers split upon the death of King Viserys. Sir Laurent Marbrand and Sir Eric Cargill were already at Dragonstone defending Rhaenyra and her blacks, later being joined by Sir Stephen Darklyn, the 3 forming the core of her new Queensguard. The other 4, Sir Criston Cole, Sir Eric Cargill, Sir Rickard Thorne, Sir Wellis Fell, sided with Aegon II and his Greens at King's Landing. Lucian of Tarth later composed Farewell, My Brother about the purported last parting of the brothers of Cargill. Desiring revenge for the murder of his heir, Aegon meant to descend on Dragonstone atop Sunfire to seize or slay his half-sister and her bastard sons. The Green Council managed to dissuade him. Sir Criston Cole, the Hand of the King and Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, proposed to use stealth and treachery as the Pretender Princess had done. Thus he tasked Sir Auric with infiltrating Dragonstone in the guise of his twin, Sir Eric. It is uncertain whether he was to kill Rhaenyra or her children, as accounts differ. According to Eustace, Sir Eric used the Red Keep sept to pray forgiveness for the mother above. Monken states the target was Rhaenyra, while Mushroom insists it was her sons Jacaerys and Joffrey Strong. But the twins happened to come upon each other in one of the halls of the castle's citadel and fought to the death. According to the songs, the brothers professed their love as their swords clashed, dying in one another's arms after fighting for an hour with duty in their hearts. However, the account of Mushroom, who claimed to have witnessed the duel, they condemned each other as traitors and were both mortally wounded within moments. Following the assault on Harrenhal, the Battle of the Burning Mill, and the taking of Stonehenge, King Aegon II Targaryen stripped Sir Otto Hightower of his title of Hand of the King and granted it to Sir Criston Cole, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Criston advised moving against the traitors that had bent the knee to Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen. While House Velaryon and House Celtigar were unreachable, the Black Lords whose land were on the mainland had no protection against Aegon's loyalists. First, they reached Rossby and Stokeworth, whose lords were blacks but had been captured in King's Landing during the initial coup, and agreed to bend the knee in order to spare their own lives. Having secured their submission, Aegon II's host passed bloodlessly through both castles and even added their strength to his own. In addition to dragons, Aegon and Criston Cole marched out of King's Landing with 100 knights, 500 men-at-arms, and 3 times as many sellswords, so about 2,400 in total. The forced addition of men from Rossby and Stokeworth would have increased this to slightly under 3,000 men by the time they reached Duskendale. While Duskendale was a walled port town, it was caught completely by surprise and unprepared. It fell quickly to Aegon II's forces and was sacked, while the ships at the harbor were set on fire. Lord Gunther Darklyn was beheaded for treason. Most of his household knights submitted to Aegon, although a few decided to follow Gunther in death. Sir Criston Cole, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard and the new Hand of the King to Aegon II, devised a more aggressive strategy for the Greens than his predecessor as Hand, Sir Otto Hightower. Criston planted a trap for the Blacks at Rook's Rest, while also forcing the submission of the nearby Crownlands houses that were aligned with Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen. Lord Staunton had been forewarned of the approach of Sir Criston's army. He closed the gates of Rook's Rest, but was unable to prevent Criston from burning his fields or killing his small folk and livestock. When supplies in Rook's Rest began to run low, Lord Staunton asked for assistance from Queen Rhaenyra, sending a raven to Dragonstone. Queen Rhaenyra's sons Jacaerys and Joffrey Velaryon were eager to join the fight atop their dragons Vermax and Tyraxes, but she forbade them to go. Instead, 9 days after Staunton's message, Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, and her dragon Meleys, the Red Queen, arrived alone above Rook's Rest to aid Lord Staunton. However, Criston was prepared, and he had his archers and scorpions fire at Meleys. The dragon was largely unharmed by these attacks, and she responded by burning Criston's soldiers with dragon fire. Criston Cole then sprung his trap. King Aegon Targaryen and his brother, Prince Aemond, appeared in the sky atop their dragons, Sunfire and Vhagar, and attacked Rhaenys and Meleys. The three dragons fought 1,000 feet above the field. When Meleys closed her jaws around Sunfire's neck, Vhagar fell upon them from above, causing the three dragons to crash into the ground. Although Aemond and Vhagar rose unscathed, Meleys was broken and ripped to pieces from the fall, according to the book, and Sunfire had one wing torn from his body. Aegon suffered severe burns and broken bones. The blackened body of Rhaenys was found besides the carcass of her dragon. Aemond, Criston, and the surviving Greens took Rook's Rest and killed Lord Staunton and his garrison of 100 soldiers. The heads of Lord Staunton and Meleys were taken to King's Landing. The small folk of the city were greatly awed by the sight of the dragon's head, drawn through the city on a cart. Thousands of people left the city, until Dowager Queen Alicent Hightower ordered the gates closed and barred. Sir Criston Cole lost 800 soldiers to Meleys' dragon fire. King Aegon was incapacitated by his burns for a year. Prince Aemond Targaryen became regent while his brother recovered. Aegon's injured dragon Sunfire was flightless and too heavy to be moved, so was left behind in the fields of Rook's Rest to eat carcasses and livestock. The loss of Rhaenys Targaryen and her dragon Meleys was a severe blow to the Blacks. Rhaenys' husband, Lord Corlys Velaryon, was enraged and blamed her death on Queen Rhaenyra, stating that if the queen or her sons had gone with their dragons, his wife might still be alive. Lord Wally's Mooten later led the retaking of Rook's Rest for the Blacks, but was slain in a failed attempt to kill Sunfire. Lord Corlys Velaryon, upon learning of the death of his wife Rhaenys, threatened to leave Rhaenyra's cause, until Prince Jacaerys named him the Hand of the Queen. They sent Prince Joffrey to the Vale of Arryn with Lady Rhaena and 3 dragon eggs, and Joffrey's dragon Tyraxes. Prince Aegon the Younger and Prince Viserys were sent to Pentos on the Gay Abandon, to be fostered with the Prince of Pentos, a friend of Daemon's, until Rhaenyra had secured the Iron Throne. Jacaerys wanted to attack the capital with as many dragons as possible. With 6 riderless dragons present on Dragonstone, Jacaerys called out to dragon seeds, promising knighthood and wealth to anyone who could master a dragon. Many were injured or died, among them Lord Commander Steffon Darklyn, though 4 people eventually succeeded. Vermithor was claimed by Hugh Hammer, Silverwing by Ulf the White, Seasmoke by Adam of Hull, and Sheepstealer by a girl named Nettles. Corlys asked Rhaenyra to remove the taint of bastardy from Adam and his brother, Alan, making them true Velaryons, and he named Adam heir to Driftmark. House Velaryon blockaded the Gullet and controlled access to Blackwater Bay at the start of the Civil War. After the assault on Harrenhal by Prince Daemon Targaryen and further blows to the Greens, Sir Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King to Aegon II, hatched a plan to break the Velaryons' fleet blockade. Otto reached out across the narrow sea to enemies of Prince Daemon, the Triarchy, hoping to persuade them to move against the Sea Snake. Lord Corlys Velaryon. Otto's plan took time, and Aegon II eventually ran out of patience with his grandfather's time, replacing him as hand with Sir Criston Cole. The schemes of Otto eventually bore fruit, as the High Council of the Triarchy accepted his offer and alliance in Tyrosh. 90 warships, commanded by Admiral Shakara Lohar of Lys, swept through the Stepstones under the banners of the 3 daughters, bending their oars for the Gullet. On Dragonstone, it was decided by Prince Jacaerys Velaryon that his half-brothers, Princes Aegon and Viserys Targaryen, would be fostered with the Prince of Pentos until their mother, Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen, had secured the Iron Throne. The princess departed on a Pentoshi cog, the Gay Abandon, towards the end of 129 AC. The Sea Snake sent out 7 of his warships with them as an escort. The ship encountered the Triarchy fleet, which had sailed to the Gullet. The Gay Abandon was taken captive and her escorts sunk or captured. Possessed only of a dragon egg, Viserys had no way of escaping from the cog and was made captive by a Tyroji captain. Aegon escaped the gay abandon on his young dragon, Stormcloud. Sailors attempted to bring them down, and Stormcloud was wounded by arrows and scorpion bolts. Nevertheless, they flew to Dragonstone, where Aegon delivered the news of the threat from the east. Stormcloud died at Dragonstone from his wounds. Battle began on the 5th day of the year, 130 AC. Shakara Lohar divided the Triarchy's ships into 2 squadrons, entering the gullet from the north and south of Dragonstone. They attacked at sunrise, surprising House Velaryon's fleet. Flying on Vermax to meet the fleet of the Triarchy, Prince Jacaerys Velaryon swept down upon a line of Lyseni galleys. The sailors had experience fighting Prince Daemon Targaryen and his dragon Caraxes during the War for the Stepstones, so their captains directed their spears and arrows against Jacaerys. One ship caught on fire, and then another, however, when Jacaerys was joined by Ulf the White on Silverwing, Nettles on Sheepstealer, Adam Velaryon on Seasmoke, and Hugh Hammer on Vermithor. The line of warships from the Free Cities shattered, as one galley after another turned away. Vermax flew too low, however, and crashed down into the sea, possibly wounded from a crossbow bolt to the eye or pulled down by a grapnel. Survivors say he struggled in the rigging of a burning galley and sank with it. Jacaerys leapt free, but was then killed by a Myrish crossbowman. North and south of Dragonstone, the battle continued into nighttime. The southern squadron bypassed Dragonstone, believing it was too strong to assault, and instead attacked Driftmark, setting afire the harbor of Spicetown with fire ships. The town was sacked, with its inhabitants butchered and left as carrion. Hightide and the treasures of Lord Corlys Velaryon were burned by Myrish and Tyroji soldiers, with the Sea Snake servants cut down as they fled. Thousands died from the battle, and Spicetown was never rebuilt. The Velaryon fleet lost almost a third of its strength. Prince Jacaerys Velaryon and his dragon Vermax were killed, and Prince Viserys Targaryen was taken captive, but presumed dead by both sides. Prince Aegon the Younger never forgave himself for abandoning his little brother. According to Mushroom, Hugh the Hammer and Ulf the White celebrated their participation. Nettles and Adam Velaryon were heavily affected, with the latter seeking out the Sea Snake. Through what they spoke to each other remains unknown. Many people on Dragonstone came to resent Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen for kin they had lost during the battle. Only 28 of the 90 ships commanded by Sharako Lohar returned home, and only 3 of those were not crewed by Lyseni. The gullet was considered a disaster by the Triarchy. The Myrish and Tyroji widows accused Shakaro of sending their fleets to destruction, while holding back his own Lyseni ships, thus beginning a quarrel that would eventually lead to the Daughters' War. A disgraced Sharako discreetly sold the captive Viserys to Magister Bombaro Bazan of Lys. Ultimately, the Battle of the Gullet was very costly for both sides, and could be considered both a tactical victory for the Greens and a strategic win for the Blacks. Whereas the death of Prince Jacaerys deprived the Blacks of one of their own commanders and Queen Rhaenyra of her eldest heir. The Greens had failed in their main goal, to break the hold of the Velaryon fleet on the east coast of Westeros. Moreover, the Greens' allies in the southern Free Cities took such heavy losses that they played no further part in the war. Given that Aegon II's main supporters were House Hightower, the family of his mother Alicent, the Greens assumed the lords and lands of the Reach would side with them. Instead, many of the major lords from the north and east of the Reach declared for Rhaenyra Targaryen and her Blacks, including houses Caswell, Rowan, and Tarly. Several of the Hightower's own vassals declared for Rhaenyra, such as houses Beesbury and Costain. With the Reach divided between Blacks and Greens, and Lord Lionel Tyrell of Highgarden only a baby, his regent mother declared House Tyrell neutral in the Civil War. Instead of quickly marching armies from the Reach to join with the other Green armies in the north to overwhelm the Blacks, the Hightowers and their allies had to slowly fight through the Reach itself. Following the early Black victories in the Riverlands at Harrenhal and Stonehenge, Sir Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King, sent messages to his nephew, Lord Ormond Hightower, to deploy the large Hightower army to put down these rebellions in the Reach. Ormond assembled a great host and marched out of Oldtown, only to be quickly set upon by Black forces. While they were far outnumbered by the Hightower army, the Black forces faced them from multiple directions and used harassment tactics to show their advantage. Alan Tarley and Alan Beesbury, the two Allans, joined forces to raid Ormond's camps day and night, kill his scouts, and set fires in his line of march. Further south, Lord Owen Costwain came up from Three Towers to harass the Hightower's baggage train in their rear. These hit-and-run attacks from multiple directions lasted for several months, but the Hightowers failed to pin down the rebels. By late 129 AC, worse news reached Ormond that a large host equal in size to its own was descending from the north of Mander, led by Thaddeus Rowan, Lord of Golden Grove. The host apparently consisted of the combined strength of the Rowans, Caswells, and other blacks in the northern reach. Faced with enemies in front and behind rather than advance, Ormond decided to halt the camp in a defensive position along the Honeywine. He remained there for several weeks, while sending messages to King's Landing, urging Aegon II and his brother Aemon Targaryen to send one of their dragons to aid them. However, Aegon had been badly injured at the Battle of Rook's Rest, and the hot-heated Aemon decided that the greatest threat was from his uncle Daemon Targaryen at Harrenhal, so he ignored Ormond's calls for aid and took Vhagar and his remaining army north into the Riverlands. The Hightower army left Old Town soon after the war began in the Riverlands, around mid-129 AC, while Ormond halted his advance soon after the Battle of Rook's Rest in late 129 AC. Rowan's army reached the Honeywine roughly 3 weeks into the new year, 130 AC, a fortnight after the Battle of the Gullet, which took place on the 5th day of 130 AC. In the third week of the year 130 AC, Ormond Hightower's army was caught between two armies while backed against the banks of the Honeywine. From the northeast, Lord Thaddeus Rowan and Tom Flowers, the bastard of Bitterbridge, came in with a large host of mounted knights. Sir Alan Beesbury, Lord Alan Tarley, and Lord Owen Castroin joined their smaller forces together and attacked the Hightowers from behind, cutting off their retreat south to Old Town. Attacked from the front and rear, Lord Hightower's lines were starting to crumble, and defeat seemed all but a foregone conclusion. Just then, a massive shadow appeared in the sky above them, Prince Daeron Targaryen on his dragon Tessarion. It was then that the battle turned in the favor of Aegon's forces, and the rout was underway with heavy losses in the retreat. Tom Flowers was killed in the battle, and Lord Owen Castroin was mortally wounded by John Roxton, wielding the Valyrian steel sword Orphanmaker. Both Alan Tarley and Alan Beesbury were taken captive. The only black commander who managed to escape was Thaddeus Rowan, who retreated north with the remains of his host. The battle was a significant blow to the Blacks, ending their offensive operations in the Reach. In addition to their armies being destroyed, most of the major black commanders in the Reach were either killed or captured in the battle. Thaddeus Rowan was the only exception, though he apparently bent the knee several months later. Following only a fortnight after the devastating Battle of the Gullet, Lord Barrett Emmond suggested that the time had come for a negotiated peace. Instead, the recent tragedies pushed Rhaenyra Targaryen to make a risky strike on King's Landing itself, as Daemon's strategic plan had lured Aemon and most of the city's defenders into the Riverlands. Daeron Targaryen was hailed as a hero that day, and knighted by Lord Ormond Hightower with the Valyrian steel longsword Vigilance. Daeron was first called Daeron the Daring after the battle, though Daeron modestly said Tessarion was the true hero of the battle. The battle did, however, succeed in slowing the advance of the large Hightower army, indirectly preventing the Greens in the Reach from aiding the Greens to the north. The Westerlands armies were annihilated in the battle by the lakeshore, while the Green armies from the Crownlands were destroyed in the Butcher's Ball. With young Tessarion now joining the Hightower army, none of the remaining blacks in the Reach could stand against them. Lord Ormond and Prince Daeron enforced the submission of the Rowans of Golden Grove, the Oakhearts of Old Oak, and the Lords of the Shield Islands. The Hightower army spent the next months slowly advancing up the Rose Road, smashing any black forces that attempted to harass them. Daeron on Tessarion proved invaluable in scouting ahead of the main host from the air, to give them advanced warning of enemy traps and ambushes. Eventually they besieged Long Table, then sacked Bitterbridge, where they crossed the Mander again and proceeded east towards King's Landing, leading the First Battle of Tumbleton. A Green ally of King Aegon II, Lord Jason Lannister, led the Westermen in attacking the Rivermen, many of whom were black supporters of Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen. The Westermen met the outnumbered Rivermen at the crossing of the Red Fork. The Rivermen threw back 3 attempts of the Greens to cross the river, with Lord Jason Lannister being slain in the third attack by a squire. Pate of Longleaf, command of the Lannister host, was assumed by Sir Adrian Tarbeck. Adrian and 100 knights shed their heavy armor, swam the Red Fork upstream of the fighting, and surprised Lord Tristan Vance's men from the rear. The Rivermen resistance collapsed after Adrian slew Tristan, allowing the remaining Westermen to cross the Red Fork. Lord Peter knighted Pate of Longleaf, who became known as Longleaf the Lion Slayer. The Lannister host continued to march east towards Harrenhal, winning victories under Adrian's command. The Westermen were briefly checked at Acorn Hall by Lord Joseph Smallworth and Lord Peter, but Lord Piper died in battle and Lord Smallwood retreated back to his castle. 3 days later, the Rivermen regrouped under a hedge knight, Sir Harry Penny, and gave battle to the Westermen again. While the Lannister host once again prevailed, Sir Adrian and Sir Harry killed each other in the fighting. With Adrian's death, command of the Westermen passed to the aged and wounded Lord Humphrey Lefford. The Lannister host continued east into the Riverlands, but were eventually crushed in the battle by the lakeshore. With Jason dead and Casterly Rock in disarray, Lord Dalton Greyjoy, the Red Kraken, then attacked the Westerlands. Jason's widow, Lady Johanna Lannister, barred the gates of Casterly Rock, but was unable to prevent the Ironborn from sacking Lannisport and raiding the coast. Lord Jason Lannister was slain during the Battle of the Red Fork, with Sir Adrian Tarbeck taking command of the victorious Greens and Lord Peter Piper leading the surviving Blacks in retreat. As the Westermen marched east towards Harrenhal, they were confronted at Acorn Hall by Blacks led by Sir Jothus Smallwood, the Lord of the Castle, and Lord Piper. Peter died during the battle, however, and Joseph retreated into Acorn Hall. According to Mushroom, Lord Piper died of a burst heart when he saw his grandson's head on a spear. 3 days after the battle at Acorn Hall, Adrian and Sir Harry Penny slew each other in renewed fighting after the Rivermen regrouped. Lord Humphrey Lefford took command of the remaining Greens. Rather than besiege the few survivors in Acorn Hall, the Lannister host bypassed it and continued their advance. Thus Stanton Piper and Joseph Smallwood survived, and later in the war they scrapped up new levies from old men and green boys to fight in the Second Battle of Tumbleton. The battle by the lakeshore, called the Fish Feed by its participants, was a major battle along the shores of the God's Eye in the Riverlands during the Dance of the Dragons. It was the bloodiest land battle of the entire war. During the Dance of the Dragons, House Lannister of the Westerlands supported the Greens, while House Stark of the North and most of the disorganized lords in the Riverlands supported the Blacks. Lord Jason Lannister led an eastward army in support of Aegon II, but Jason was killed by Pate the Longleaf in the battle at the Red Fork, and Sir Adrian Tarbeck was later slain by Sir Harry Penny. The Lannister army continued slowly because of the age and infirmity of its wounded new commander, Lord Humphrey Lefford. When the Westermen reached the western shore of the God's Eye, Lord Lefford discovered he was opposed by Lord Roderick Dustin with 2,000 winter wolves, all of them mounted, and Lord Forrest Frey with 200 knights and 600 infantrymen, and Rob Rivers with 300 archers from Raventree Hall. The Westermen were quickly faced with another threat from the south, with Sir Pate of Longleaf arrived with survivors from previous battles in the war, possibly the Pipers and Vances, as well as Lords Bigglestone, Chambers, and Perrin. The cautious Humphrey did not rush to face either enemy force, and thus be caught out of position in the field, but took up a defensive position when his back was to the lakeshore. Humphrey then sent ravens to nearby Harrenhal to seek assistance from Prince Aemon Targaryen, but Red Robb shot down the dozen ravens. The Blacks received further reinforcement with the arrival of more river lords from the following day, including Sir Jerbold Grey, Lord John Carleton, and young Lord Benjicott Blackwood. Despite cornering the Lannister army, the Black commanders now faced a difficult decision. The Lannisters had pulled back into a defensive position behind columns of disciplined pikemen, so a direct assault would result in heavy losses. Nonetheless, they could not simply wait to starve out the Lannister army, because Aemon's host would eventually realize that communications had ceased, and rush to the aid of the Lannisters, bringing Aemon's dragon Vhagar. Lord Dustin and the other Black commanders therefore chose to rush the Lannister position while they still could. The army of Westermen were attacked at dawn the next morning. The Winter Wolves led the attack, their cavalry charging the Lannister spearmen 5 times, but suffering grievous losses in the attempts. Attacks by the Blacks from 3 sides, the Lannister soldiers were gradually forced back into the God's Eye. Hundreds died fighting among the lake's reeds, and hundreds of others drowned while trying to escape. The battle degenerated into carnage, and was ultimately the bloodiest land battle of the entire war. The high number of casualties led to it being called the Fish Feed by its participants. The Blacks lost Lords Frey, Bigglestone, and Charlton, and 2/3 of the northern soldiers were killed or wounded as well. The Greens lost their commander, Lord Lefford, as well as Lords Swift and Rain, and Knights Clarent Crakehall and Emery Hill. Young Lord Blackwood wept when he saw all of the dead. The Lannisters' main army was totally destroyed in the battle, the flower of knighthood from all the Westerlands cut down in a single day, with only skeleton forces left to defend their home territory. Dalton Greyjoy opportunistically allied with Rhaenyra so the Ironborn could plunder the coasts of the Westerlands, sacking Lannisport but failing to take Castle Rock itself. Despite their disproportionate victory, the Black armies in the Riverlands were also badly mauled in the bloodbath. In response to the Greens' crushing defeat, Prince Aemond and Sir Criston Cole abandoned Harrenhal. Aemond waged a guerrilla war atop Vhagar, and Criston headed south to fight Lord Ormond Hightower. The victorious Rivermen avoided facing Criston's host directly, but wore him down with ambushes and scorched earth tactics, which included arranging the bodies of fallen soldiers from the fish feed in gruesome displays to frighten Criston's host. This caused many to desert. The Rivermen and a few surviving Winterwolves eventually cornered Criston's depleted army in the Butcher's Ball. So, to give a better understanding of the logistics of this battle specifically, the description of the numbers on both sides during the battle is oddly worded in the text. So, when the Westermen host set out into the Riverlands, it says that Lord Jason Lannister brought a formidable host of 1,000 armored knights, and 7 times as many archers and men-at-arms, so at least 8,000. Other Green armies, however, are consistently described as having core regular armies of knights, archers, and men-at-arms, but then supplemented by 3 times as many sellswords, free riders, camp followers, and feudal levies. So the Hightower army is described as having 1,000 knights, 1,000 archers, and 5,000 men-at-arms, but also thousands of sellswords and rabble, and later is described as having 20,000 men in total. Aegon's army in the Battle of Rook's Rest is described with the same ratio, 600 knights and men-at-arms, but also thrice as many, sellswords and levies. So it's possible that in the beginning of their campaign, the host from the Westerlands had an additional 24,000 sellswords and free riders for about 30 to 32,000 men total. But this might also mean that the number of soldiers on the Black side was also 4 times higher, because the text kind of glosses over sellswords and levies. But then again, the Greens absconded with the old royal treasury and controlled wealthy port cities, so it's possible that the Greens were able to hire far more sellswords than the Blacks were. But even assuming the Lannister host only consisted of 8,000 men, the description of losses at the fish feed doesn't match up very well. By nightfall, 2,000 men were dead, among them many notables, including Lord Frey, Lord Lefford, etc., which lists the lords from both sides. But then it goes on to say that 2/3 of the Winterwolves died, a force that itself consisted of about 2,000 men. This would mean that about 1,300 Winterwolves died. By then, barely 700 men from both sides would have died in the entire battle. Now, for the fall of King's Landing, which I'm sure everyone was waiting for when they saw House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 8, or if you've read the books, you know it's coming. But Prince Aemond Targaryen and Sir Criston Cole gathered their Green forces to march on Harrenhal. This left King's Landing largely defenseless. This created an opportunity that the Blacks seized. Prince Daemon Targaryen on Caraxes and Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen on Syrax flew over the capital and circled their dragons above Aegon's high hill. The fleet of the Sea Snake, Lord Corlys Velaryon, then arrived to the east of Blackwater Bay. The sight of Daemon on Caraxes and Rhaenyra on Syrax over King's Landing sent the city into a panic. Alicent Hightower tried to send riders to bring back Aemond and ravens to Lealords, but her efforts were quickly stopped. Unknown to Alicent was that the Goldcloaks, the city watch of King's Landing, had turned. The Goldcloaks were loyal to Daemon, who had once been their leader. When he went to dispatch ravens, Grandmaster Orwyle was beaten and bound by Goldcloaks as he arrived in his chambers. The 7 commanders of the city gates, who had been chosen for their loyalty to King Aegon, were either imprisoned or killed in the moment Caraxes was spotted over the Red Keep. Sir Gawain Hightower, the second in command of the city watch, was captured when he tried to sound the alarm. He was brought before Sir Luther Largent, the commander of the Goldcloaks. Gawain denounced him as a turncloak, to which Luther replied, "Daemon gave us these cloaks, and they're gold no matter how you turn them." Luther then murdered Gawain and had the city gates open to the army pouring in from the Sea Snake's ships. 13 House Hightower knights and 100 men-at-arms managed to hold the river gate for 8 hours, from both attacks without and within the city. The other 6 gates, however, fell swiftly, and the Black's army entered the city unmolested through these gates. The city fell in less than a day. Seeing hope was lost, Queen Alicent ordered her forces to surrender. King Aegon escaped the fall of King's Landing. He was smuggled out by the Master of Whisperers, Lord Larry Strong, via secret passages. Aegon was protected by two of his Kingsguard knights, Sir Wellis Fell and Sir Rickard Thorne. He was also accompanied by his children, Princess Jaehaera and Prince Maelor. Lord Otto Hightower and Lord Jasper Wilde were executed for treason. Lords Rossby and Stokeworth tried to switch their allegiances back to Rhaenyra, but she refused, judging them to be faithless friends, and ordered their executions. Queen Alicent Hightower and Princess Helaena Targaryen were held as captives. Sir Tywin Lannister was tortured for information on where he had hidden the crown's treasure. Grand Maester Orwyle was confined to the Black Cells. Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen then seized the Iron Throne, though many lords noted she cut herself on the throne, starting rumors that the throne had actually rejected her. At first, the population of the city had welcomed Rhaenyra's ascent to the Iron Throne, as Aegon II and Prince Aemond had not been much loved. In time, however, with more executions happening daily and more taxes being raised to fund the wars, the population began to loathe Rhaenyra, calling her King Maegor with teats. When Queen Alicent heard of Rhaenyra's planned campaigns against Prince Aemond and Prince Daeron, she made a new offer of peace. This time, she proposed that the Seven Kingdoms would be divided between two claimants. At the beginning of the war, the office of Master of Ships had been offered to Dalton Greyjoy, the Lord of the Iron Islands, by the Greens. Rhaenyra's council offered Dalton something more to his liking, however, and so House Greyjoy declared for the Blacks. With Lord Jason Lannister dying after the Red Fork, his Lannister army destroyed in the Fish Feed, and the Green armies of the Reach marching east to Tumbleton, the coasts of the Westerlands had only skeleton defenses. For several years, Dalton and his Ironborn raided and pillaged the coasts of the Westerlands and the Reach. Dalton nearly captured Case and seized Fair Isle, and though the Ironborn could not force entry into Cashley Rock after Jason's widow Joanna closed its gates, they sacked Lannisport. After the battle at Rook's Rest, Aegon was badly injured and his brother Aemond was given command of the Green's forces in King's Landing, as regent for his brother until he recovered. An aggressive young man, Aemond decided to attack the Black forces gathered at Harrenhal under his uncle Daemon, before they had sufficient force to strike at the capital. Aemond devised a plan to catch the River Lords on two fronts, by having the Lannister army invade the Riverlands from the west, while he led forces from King's Landing to attack from the east. Aemond led a force of 4,000 men in total out of King's Landing, also led by Sir Criston Cole of the Kingsguard, now Hand of the King. Aegon II, Aemond, and Criston had previously led an army of slightly less than 3,000 to the battle at Rook's Rest, where they lost about 800 men. While in King's Landing, Aemond reconstructed his forces and sent forth all the remaining strength to the advance on Harrenhal. This is exactly what Daemon had hoped for, to lure Aemond away from King's Landing, leaving only a skeleton defense force behind, enough that a smaller force from Dragonstone and Driftmark could quickly seize the capital using dragons and the Velaryon fleet. Combined with the betrayal of the City Watch, who were still loyal to Daemon, the city fell within a single day with the fighting. The main Black land army at Harrenhal did not simply wait to be caught in a pincher. They abandoned Harrenhal to attack the Lannister army in the west. They succeeded in annihilating the entire Lannister host at the battle by the lakeshore, though with heavy losses. It was now Aemond and Criston's host who were trapped between two fronts at Harrenhal, though they still had more men as well as the great dragon Vhagar. They were caught out of position in hostile territory, and with the Riverlord's scorched earth tactics to deny them new provisions. Unaware of these recent developments, Aemond and Criston's host advanced northwest to Harrenhal. They faced little opposition, only to find the castle abandoned. Red Rob Rivers shot down messenger ravens from the Lannister army to the west, warning of their imminent destruction, so news of the twin disasters only arrived at Harrenhal after it was already too late. Criston and Aemond disagreed on how to respond. With their supplies running low, Criston decided to march south from Harrenhal through the Riverlands to join the army of Ormond Hightower, Lord of the Hightower, and Prince Daeron Targaryen, which was marching through the Reach. Rather than accompany Criston, Aemond One-Eye flew into a rage and decided to burn the Riverlands with his dragon Vhagar. Criston marched out of Harrenhal with 3,600 men, having lost about 400 due to enemy raids, disease, and desertion. They traveled south along the western shore of the God's Eye Lake, but the Riverlord enemies practiced scorched earth tactics, burning their own forests and villages. The Blacks used guerrilla warfare against the Greens, and by the day more of Criston's host deserted or joined the Blacks. On one occasion, the Greens came across a grisly display of feasting corpses, the bodies of men who had fallen at the fish feed. Later at the village of Crossed Elms, Criston's forces were attacked by blacks disguised as corpses, losing 12 men before realizing Black Trombo's ruse. While heading towards the Blackwater Rush, Sir Criston Cole led his weakened Greens into an ambush at a stony ridge south of the God's Eye. The Greens were outnumbered 2-1 by the forces of the Riverlands and the North. Criston held a parley with Sir Garibold Grey, Sir Pate of Longleaf, and Roderick Dustin, the Lord of Barrowton. Criston offered to surrender, but was refused by the three blacks. Criston, a famed knight who was also the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard for Aegon II, in addition to being the King's Hand, prepared to fight all three of his counterparts at once. Before he could do so, however, the Kingmaker was struck down by arrows fired by Red Rob Rivers and two of his longbowmen. With Criston Cole dead, Lord Dustin sounded the charge of the Black's vanguard, which consisted of his Winterwolves and River Knights. The Greens quickly collapsed, with hundreds of them killed while trying to flee the ridge. After the battle, Sir Garibold Grey remarked, "Today was a butchery, not a battle." Upon hearing Garibold's observation, Mushroom began calling the slaughter the Butcher's Ball. Sir Criston's death in the Butcher's Ball marked the high point of Rhaenyra Targaryen's fortunes. However, Prince Aemon Targaryen and King Aegon II still remained to carry on the Greens' cause. After the Battle of the Honeywine, Lord Ormond Hightower and Prince Daeron Targaryen forced the Oakhearts, Rowans, and the Lords of the Shield Islands to submit to King Aegon II. While Queen Rhaenyra took King's Landing, Ormond marched on Long Table, seat of House Merryweather. Ormond's siege of Long Table forced numerous refugees to flee before his host to Bitterbridge. Sir Rickard Thorne tried to bring Prince Maelor Targaryen and his dragon egg to the safety of Ormond's camp outside Long Table, but the pair were killed at Bitterbridge. Lady Caswell sent Maelor's dragon egg to Ormond. Lady Merryweather eventually yielded Long Table to Ormond, who claimed the castle's wealth and food but did no harm to the Merryweathers. Lord Hightower then marched on Bitterbridge and Tumbleton. The town of Bitterbridge became crowded from refugees fleeing the host of Greens led by Lord Ormond Hightower. A disguised Sir Rickard Thorne of the Kingsguard and his charge Prince Maelor Targaryen tried to stay overnight in the Hogshead at a Bitterbridge Inn. While journeying to the safety of Ormond's host at the nearby siege of Long Table, Sly, a stable boy from the inn's proprietor Ben Buttercakes, informed the inn's common room that had discovered Maelor's dragon egg. After slaying Ben, Rickard rode from the southern shore from the Mander, but he was killed by a crossbowman at the bridge. Mushroom claims Willow Poundstone accidentally crushed Maelor to death. Eustace says he was chopped into 6 pieces by a butcher, and Munkin writes that Maelor was torn apart by a mob. Lady Caswell, whose lord husband had earlier been executed by Maelor's father, King Aegon II, was aghast at the violence. She hanged Willow, Sly, and the man whose horse had been stolen by Rickard. Then she sent Rickard's corpse and Maelor's head to Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen in King's Landing, while Maelor's dragon egg was sent to Lord Ormond Hightower at Long Table. Ormond was generous after Long Table was yielded, taking its wealth and grains but doing no harm to the Merryweathers. Lady Caswell hoped Ormond Hightower would be merciful when he arrived at Bitterbridge. Prince Daeron Targaryen refused, however, and used the dragon flame of Tessarion to burn the town. Daeron began with the Hogshead, but the conflagration spread to the other inns, storehouses, and homes. Hundreds of wounded died within Bitterbridge's sept, and townspeople were cut down by Ormond's soldiers or forced into the Mander to drown. The bridge across the river was spared, however. Begging for mercy for her children, Lady Caswell yielded her castle to Lord Hightower and then hanged herself from the gatehouse. Ormond then indeed spared her sons and daughter, sending them to be prisoners of Old Town, but ordered the entire castle's remaining garrison to be put to the sword. The first Battle of Tumbleton was a battle fought between the Greens and the Blacks at Tumbleton in the Reach during the Dance of the Dragons. It was known for the treasons of Tumbleton, in which the two betrayers burnt the town with dragonfire, and the ensuing sack of Tumbleton by the victors. It was followed by another battle, the Second Battle of Tumbleton. Lord Ormond Hightower led an army of Greens from the Reach towards King's Landing, which at the time was held by Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen and the Blacks. Sir Ulf White and Sir Hugh Hammer were sent with their dragons Vermithor and Silverwing to Tumbleton, the seat of House Footley and the last stronghold of Rhaenyra's between the capital and Ormond's advancing army. The Blacks defending the market town, including thousands from House Caswell of Bitterbridge, House Merryweather of Long Table, and lands further south. Sir Garibold Grey, Sir Pate of Longleaf, Red Rob Rivers, and the Winterwolves of Lord Roderick Dustin arrived victorious from the Butcher's Ball. Other defenders came from the Blackwater Rush, including Moslander of Yore, Sir Garrick Hall, Sir Merrill the Bold, Sir Roger Corn, and Lord Orwain Burnie. Total numbers vary between 6,000 and 12,000, with true telling using nearly 9,000. The Greens greatly outnumbered the Blacks. Some Greens infiltrated the town as refugees, and Roger and Owain were secretly loyal to King Aegon II. At the start of the battle, Sir Gerbold Grey led 6,000 Blacks against the troops of Lord Ormond Hightower, whose archers thinned Gerbold's ranks. The bowmen of Rob Rivers defended Gerbold's men as they retreated from Ormond's heavy horse. Lord Roderick Dustin then led the Winter Wolves out Postern Gate against the Hightowers. Although the Northmen were outnumbered 10-1, the Winter Wolves managed to reach the commander of the Greens. Roderick slew Ormond and his cousin, Sir Brynden Hightower, before succumbing to his wounds. The appearance of the dragon Tessarion, the mount of Prince Daeron Targaryen, across the field did not dismay Tumbleton's defenders, as Tessarion was smaller than Vermithor and Silverwing. The defenders of Tumbleton thought the battle was won when the Hightowers were killed, but the two betrayers, Sir Hugh Hammer and Sir Ulf White, turned their dragons upon the town. Buildings throughout Tumbleton burned to ash, and thousands burned to death or drowned trying to cross the Mander. Outside the walls, Sir Pate of Longleaf was unhorsed and trampled, while Garibold was burned by Tessarion's dragon flame. Sir Roger Corn's men opened Tumbleton's gates to the Greens, and Lord Orwain Burney betrayed Sir Merrill the Bold within the town's castle. Lord Footley's men yielded, but they were then bound and beheaded by the Greens. The battle was followed by a chaotic and lengthy sack of Tumbleton by the victorious Green soldiers, who were left leaderless with the death of Lord Ormond Hightower. Women throughout the town were raped, including crones and girls as young as 8, and not even septas and silent sisters were spared. Drunken soldiers killed every male they found, including old men and boys. Homes and shops were looted by bands of Greens, and wealthy townspeople were tortured to reveal hidden fortunes. Even babies were impaled upon spears. Sir John Roxton killed Lord Footley and claimed Lady Sheriff Footley as a prize of war, and Sir Ulf White allegedly raped 3 maidens each night. Prince Daeron Targaryen urged the most senior Hightower at Tumbleton, Sir Hobart, to bring the soldiers under control, but the unremarkable Hobart was unable to. Other nobles squabbled amongst themselves, and Lord Unwin Peake killed Lord Owain Burney during a war council. After hearing the Battle of Tumbleton and the Blacks' defeat, Dowager Queen Alicent Hightower is said to have laughed, promising, "All they have sowed, now they shall reap." Many in King's Landing tried to flee, fearing that the fate of Tumbleton would happen to the capital, but Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen had the gold cloaks seal the city gates. Remaining at Tumbleton instead of continuing on to King's Landing, the Green Army diminished daily as men deserted with their plunder. Disapproval of the two betrayers led to the formation of the Caltropes by highborn nobles, and the Greens then faced Sir Adam Velaryon and an army of rivermen in the Second Battle of Tumbleton. After escaping the fall of King's Landing, King Aegon II hid on Dragonstone, the island stronghold of his rival, Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen. He convinced several Blacks, including Sir Alfred Broom and Sir Marston Waters, to defect to the Greens to help him take the island, with the assistance of Tom Tanglebeard and Tom Tangleton. Marston secured the Ravens, preventing Grandmaster Geraldez from sending a warning, while Alfred slew the Castellan of Dragonstone, Sir Robert Quince. During the coup, Aegon fought Lady Baela Targaryen, both mounted on their dragons, Sunfire and Moondancer respectively. The dragons fought in the pre-dawn sky above the castle, eventually slamming into the yard, still fighting. Aegon jumped from the saddle 20 feet from the ground, but Baela crashed to the ground with Moondancer. Marston stopped Alfred from slaying the burned girl as she crawled away from her dying dragon, and Tom Tangletongue carried her to the maester. Aegon shattered his legs in the fall during the fight, but he refused milk of the poppy when Geraldez offered it due to fear of Geraldez trying to poison him, and because of his experience with it during his recovery after Rook's Rest. Instead, Aegon ordered Geraldez to be fed to Sunfire, though apart to remain to greet his sister. Dragonstone was now in control of King Aegon II and the Greens. Baela Targaryen, Aegon and his dragon Sunfire were seriously injured during the aerial duel over the island. The charred body of Robert Quince, Dragonstone's steward, master-at-arms, captain of the guards, and the upper torso of Grandmaster Geraldez were hanged from the castle battlements near the gate to greet Aegon's sister when she arrived. When Rhaenyra eventually returned to Dragonstone, she and her followers were quickly defeated by Sir Alfred Broom's men. The battle above the God's Eye was an aerial duel that took place in the skies above Harrenhal and the God's Eye between the two most powerful dragons, Vhagar and Caraxes, and the riders Prince Aemon Targaryen and Prince Daemon Targaryen, during the civil war of the Dance of the Dragons. After leaving Maidenpool, Daemon challenged Aemond, waiting for 13 days at Harrenhal until Aemond stopped burning the Riverlands to come face him. Aemond arrived on the 14th day, accompanied by his pregnant lover Alys Rivers. Aemond and Daemon talked briefly before mounting their dragons. Aemond passionately kissed Alys goodbye. The battle over the God's Eye was said to be a sight to see. The sun was setting as the two dragons took to the sky. The dragon's shrieks and roars could be heard from a dozen miles away. So bright was the dragon fire that small folk feared the sky was on fire. Craxi slammed into Vhagar, locking his jaws on Vhagar's neck. Both dragons were grappling as they descended from the sky. Craxi's jaw continued to tighten around Vhagar's neck, even as Vhagar's teeth tore Craxi's wing and his claws opened Craxi's belly. Prince Daemon is said to have leapt from the saddle and Craxis onto Vhagar. Daemon drove his blade, Dark Sister, through his nephew's empty eye socket just as both dragons collided with the God's Eye lake below, sending up a gout of water so high it was as tall as the Kingspire Tower at Harrenhal. Neither man could have survived. The loss of both Aemond and Daemon and their powerful dragons was a severe blow to both the Greens and the Blacks. Each side lost a capable warrior and commander as well as a powerful dragon. Vhagar's corpse was found years later when Prince Aemond's armored corpse still chained to her saddle with Dark Sister through his eye. Vhagar's skull was brought to King's Landing and displayed on the walls of the throne room. Dark Sister was restored to House Targaryen. Craxis lived long enough to crawl from the God's Eye back to the shore, where he died near Harrenhal. Daemon's body was never found, however. Some tales claimed Daemon survived and later went to find his lover, Nettles, but most historians dismiss this, believing instead that Daemon's body was carried away by currents or consumed by the fish. The riot of King's Landing took place as Queen Rhaenyra was losing her grip on the Iron Throne, and the citizens of King's Landing were living in paranoia and terror of the coming of the army and dragons of the Greens. The suicide of the beloved Princess Helaena Targaryen was the final straw as rumors were spread that she had been murdered. When the people of King's Landing learned of the slaughter during the First Battle of Tumbleton, terror began to hold grip in the city as the citizens became convinced that their city would burn once the Hightower army arrived. A man known only as the Shepherd began preaching against the Targaryens and their dragons on Cobbler's Square. He claimed that only by cleansing King's Landing of the dragons and their masters could the Seven Kingdoms avoid a doom similar to that of Valyria. Following the betrayal of Hugh Hammer and Ulf White during the First Battle of Tumbleton, Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen became convinced that none of the dragon seeds could be trusted. In King's Landing, she ordered the arrest of Sir Adam Velaryon, the legitimized heir of Lord Corlys Velaryon, Rhaenyra's Hand of the Queen. Corlys warned Adam, who fled from the dragon pit, on his dragon sea smoke. For aiding Adam in his escape, Corlys was arrested and placed in the Black Cells. As a result, the Velaryon forces, which made up more than half of Rhaenyra's army, began to abandon her cause. Some joined the Shepherd, others returned to Driftmark. Those who remained could no longer be trusted. Sir Denys Woodwright and Sir Thorin True, two of Corlys' sworn swords, attempted to break Corlys out of the dungeons, but they were caught and hanged from the walls of the Red Keep. That same day, Queen Helaena Targaryen committed suicide by jumping from her window on top of the spikes that lined the dry moat of Maegor's Holdfast. That night, the small folk of King's Landing began to tell each other that Helaena had been murdered, and placed the blame at the feet of Queen Rhaenyra, insisting she had killed Helaena because Prince Daeron Targaryen and the Hightower army would soon be at the gates. The people whispered that Sir Luthor Largent had flung Helaena from her window on Rhaenyra's order, despite the fact that Largent had been at the barracks of the City Watch of King's Landing at the Gate of the Gods when Helaena had died. According to Grand Maester Munkin, it was the Shepherd who spread the tale, although Mushroom believes the story originated from Larry Strong. The rumor of the beloved Helena's murder was quickly believed by the citizens, who had completely turned against the once beloved Rhaenyra, who was still mindful of the terrible murders of Helena's sons, Jaehaerys and Maelor. The night following Helaena Targaryen's death, King's Landing rose in a riot. The riots began in Flea Bottom, as men and women poured from the wine sinks, pot shops, and rat pits, by the hundreds and then the thousands, drunk, angry, and afraid. They called for justice for the murders of Helaena, Jaehaerys, and Maelor. Wagons were overturned and shops and warehouses were looted. No one was spared. Lady Darla Denys saw her brother Davos stabbed through the eye when he tried to defend her from drunken rapists. The rioters also attacked the manse of Lord Bartimus Seldegar, killing all the capturing Lord Bartimus, who had bound to a post and tortured until he revealed the location of his wealth. Wat the Tanner next declared that Lord Bartimos had failed to pay his cock tax, and gelded him. Sailors unable to return to their ships attacked the river gate. Sir Luther Largent and 400 gold cloaks eventually dispersed them, but not before the gate itself had been hacked half to pieces. 100 men died during or as a result of the battle. 25 of them were men from the City Watch. Sir Luther Largent next led 500 gold cloaks to Cobbler's Square, where the shepherd preached that the stranger was coming. Although Largent declared to the crowd that they only wanted the shepherd, the crowd of 10,000 people was too thick to disperse. During the chaotic battle that followed, the shepherd fled, while Largent and his men were slaughtered by the crowds. According to Septon Eustace, the shepherd controlled half the city that night. While Wat the Tanner gathered hundreds of men around him, King Gaemon Palahair was raised up in a brothel on the Street of Silk, on account of being a bastard son of King Aegon. The hedge knight Perkin the Flea crowned his squire Trystane, claiming he was the bastard son of King Viserys. Sir Perkin began to dub every man who flocked to Trystane's banner, causing hundreds of gutter knights to join their cause. As dawn broke over the city, fires were burning everywhere. Men in Flea Bottom were breaking into shops and homes, attacking everyone they happened to encounter. The remaining gold cloaks had retreated to their barracks. But as the night ended, those stationed at the Old Gate and the Dragon Gate marched forth under the command of Sir Balon Birch and Sir Garth the Harelip, to restore order in the streets north and east of the Hill of Rainies. Sir Madrick Manderley led 100 men from White Harbor to the area northeast of Aegon's High Hill, down to the Iron Gate, while Sir Torrin Manderley led his men down the Hook, and Sir Laurent Marbrand, the Lord Commander of the Queen's Guard, led 100 knights and men-at-arms into Flea Bottom. Torrin lost a quarter of his men in his struggle to return to the Red Keep. While most of Laurent's men were killed, only 16 of them returned, including Sir Glendon Good, who brought back the body of Sir Laurent who had been killed. Meanwhile, Fishmonger's Square and River Row were taken over by Sir Perkin's men, while King Trystane banner flew above the battlements of the River Gate, where the captain and the 3 of the sergeants of the gate had been hung from the gatehouse. Command of the City Watch was given to Sir Baylor Birch, and Sir Glendon Good was named Lord Commander of the Queen's Guard, and ravens were sent to Winterfell and the Eyrie. As the sun went down, even more rioters than the night before poured out into the streets. Sir Perkin led his gutter knights from the river gate down to the riverfront, while Wat the Tanner led his men against the Gate of the Gods. The garrison at the latter gate were weakened from the day before and quickly defeated. Wat, still displaying Lord Bartimos' severed head, led his men to the kingsroad out of the city. Within an hour, 2 other gates were opened: the King's Gate, whose defenders had fled, and the Lion Gate, whose defenders had joined the mob. At the same time, the shepherd appeared once again at Cobbler's Square, and called upon the large crowd to kill the dragons in the dragon pit. The crowds responded and stormed the dragon pit, resulting in the deaths of the 4 dragons housed within, as well as the death of Syrax, Rhaenyra's dragon, after her son Joffrey Velaryon stole the dragon in an attempt to reach the dragon pit himself. Joffrey was thrown off the dragon's back and died. Afterwards, his body was returned to the Red Keep by the 7 who were sent forth to bring Joffrey back to safety. Rhaenyra Targaryen's loyalists agreed that the city was lost to them, and convinced her to abandon King's Landing. Rhaenyra, Prince Aegon, and a few loyalists slipped from the city the next morning through the Dragon Gate, intent on reaching Duskendale. King's Landing descended into anarchy, a chaotic period known as the Moon of the Three Kings, or the Moon of Madness. Different factions divided up sections of the city. Sir Perkin and King Trystane ruled the Red Keep. The Shepherd ruled the Dragon Pit, and Gaemon Palahair's followers held Visenya's Hill. The Moon of the Three Kings was eventually brought to an end by Lord Bars Baratheon, who marched on King's Landing. After much troubles and effort, Rhaenyra and her son eventually reached Dragonstone, where they discovered the castle had previously fallen to King Aegon and his supporters. Rhaenyra was fed by Aegon to his dragon Sunfire, and her son Aegon the Younger looked on. King Aegon subsequently had Prince Aegon chained and brought to the dungeons. The storming of the Dragon Pit took place during the riot of King's Landing during the Dance of the Dragons. During the riots, a crazed mob, urged on by the shepherd's rantings, forced their way into the Dragon Pit atop the Hill of Rainies and slew 4 dragons housed within, as well as the dragon Syrax, who was loosed above the city. At the time of the storming of the Dragon Pit, 4 dragons were housed within: Shrykros, unclaimed since the death of Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen, Morgul, the dragon of Princess Jaehaera Targaryen, Tyraxes, the dragon ridden by Prince Joffrey Velaryon, and Dreamfire, unclaimed since Queen Helena's death. The fearful citizens of King's Landing broke out into a riot the night before Queen Helena's suicide. During the first night of these riots, the mobs plundered and killed all over the city, hacked the river gates to pieces, and killed Sir Luther Largent and his 500 gold cloaks on Cobbler's Square when they arrived to arrest the shepherd. The shepherd himself fled the gold cloaks. Although most of the mobs fled at dawn, they returned in greater numbers at the following night, dubbed the last day by Munkin. The shepherd appeared once again at Cobbler's Square to preach against the large crowd which had formed on the square. The people feared the arrival of King Aegon's dragons and army, but the shepherd told his lambs that everyone would burn when the dragons arrived, and that prayers would not be able to stay the wrath of the stranger. Instead, the shepherd claimed the only way the city would be able to achieve salvation was by killing the dragons in the dragon pit. Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen and her sons Joffrey Velaryon and Aegon Targaryen looked on with their loyalists from atop the roof of Maegor's Holdfast. Although Rhaenyra had sent riders to Sir Balon Birch at the Old Gate and Sir Garth the Harelip at the Dragon Gate to seize the shepherd, disperse his followers, and protect the dragons, they did not know whether the riders had been able to reach their destinations. Prince Joffrey wished to ride forth to protect the dragons, but Rhaenyra refused to allow it, insisting that they would need every man to defend Aegon's high hill, after the Hill of Rhaenys fell. Joffrey, fearing his own dragon Tyraxes would be killed, slipped away into the yard and loosed his mother's dragon Syrax. Mounted on Syrax's back, the prince flew out over the city. Whether it was his intent to fly on the dragon into battle, or fly to the dragon pit to fetch his own dragon Tyraxes, and perhaps the other dragons as well, is unknown. Fearful, Rhaenyra ordered men to return to her son to the castle. Sir Medric Manderly, Sir Loreth Lansdale, and Sir Harold Dark, Sir Harman of the Reeds, Sir Giles Yonwood, Sir William Royce, Sir Gleldon Good, 6 squires, 8 gold cloaks, and 20 men-at-arms rode from the Red Keep and fought their way through the city in an attempt to reach the prince. Joffrey, however, was unable to remain on Syrax's back once they were high in the air, and slid from her back 200 feet above Flea Bottom and plunged to his death. The 7 who rode came upon his body as the mob was cutting it into pieces and managed to reclaim every part of his except for a foot. The City Watch marched forth from their barracks at the Dragon's Gate to defend the Hill of Rhaenys, but they could not halt the mob. Less than 50 dragon keepers stood guard the second night of the riots. But although they defended the dragon pit to the best of their abilities, the mobs eventually smashed through the doors of the dragon pit's lesser entrances, made of oak and iron, by using crude rams and axes. Others climbed in through windows. During the battle, all dragon keepers were slaughtered. Inside, the 4 dragons had already been awakened, roused and angered by the sounds of the attack. Unable to fly away as they had been chained, the 4 dragons fought with their horns, claws, and teeth. They let loose their dragon flame and transformed the dragon pit into a fiery inferno. The first dragon to die was Shrykos, who was slain by Hob the Hewer. Hob leapt onto her neck and drove his axe down into the dragon's skull. It took 7 blows, according to Septon Eustace. Next died Morgul, slain by the Burning Knight, who rushed into the dragon's flame and stabbed him repeatedly in the eye with his spear as he burned to his own death. Tyraxes burned those who rushed him from his lair, until the front entrance of his lair was completely blocked with corpses. However, after the shepherd instructed his followers to break through the back door of the dragon's lair, the dragon became entangled in its own chains and was slain by the mob. His membranes were afterwards sliced from his wings and torn into stripes, so dragon skin cloaks could be fashioned from them. Dreamfire was able to break free from her remaining bonds. She took wing, circled the cavernous interior of the dome, and swooped down to attack the men below. She slew more men than the other 3 dragons combined. Archers and crossbowmen loosed arrows and quarrels at her, and whenever she landed, men swarmed her to attack, driving her back into the air. Eventually, one of her eyes was nicked by a crossbow bolt. Half blind and maddened, Dreamfire flew into the dragon pit's great dome above. It cracked on impact. Half of it came crumbling down, crushing her and the dragon slayers under tons of broken stone and rubble. No one knows how many people died that night. Hundreds, possibly even thousands, with many more having been injured. Following the destruction of the roof, the storming of the dragon pit ended. Yet Rhaenyra Targaryen's dragon Syrax, freed from the Red Keep stables by her son Joffrey Velaryon, now descended on the survivors who came forth from the smoking ruins. According to Mushroom, 1,000 shrieks and echoes were across the city, mingling with the dragon's roar. The Hill of Rhaenys looked as if it wore a crown of yellow fire, burning so bright that it seemed the sun was rising. Instead of breathing fire onto the mobs from above, Syrax flew down and attacked the mob with her teeth and claws, devouring the people below. Rhaenyra watches Syrax end from atop the roof of Maegor's Holdfast, clutching her only surviving son, Aegon, in her arms until Syrax fell to the ground. Mushroom, Septon Eustace, and Grand Maester Munkin had written down accounts of Syrax's death. According to Munkin, Hob the Hewer killed the dragon with his axe, although Archmaester Galdwin believes that this is almost certainly a mistake, as he considers it unlikely that the same man could have slain 2 dragons the same night and in the same manner. Others have suggested an unnamed spearman, a blood-soaked giant, who leapt onto the dragon's back, while others tell of Sir Warwick Wheaton, who supposedly slashed a wing from Syrax with a Valyrian steel sword. Galdwin believes lamination to have been the most likely option. Bean, a crossbowman, claimed responsibility for Syrax's death afterwards, and boasted of it frequently, until one of Rhaenyra's supporters grew tired of his stories and cut out his tongue. Galdwin argues that it's possible that all the candidates except for Hob the Hewer played some role in the dragon's death. However, the tale most frequently told in King's Landing is that of the shepherd. According to the tale, as others fled, the shepherd faced Syrax on his own, calling upon the Seven for success, until the warrior himself took form, 30 feet tall, with a black blade made of smoke that turned to steel. Even Septon Eustace repeats this tale in his account, while singers sang about it for many years. Shaken by the loss of her dragon and her son Joffrey Velaryon, Rhaenyra Targaryen was inconsolable, according to Mushroom. Her counselors agreed that King's Landing was lost to them, and they managed to convince Rhaenyra to abandon the city. Rhaenyra reluctantly agreed and fled the next day, sneaking out of the city with some of her loyalists and her son Aegon III. Rhaenyra reached, after great difficulty, her own castle Dragonstone, where she was subsequently captured by King Aegon II, who had taken the castle during the previous. During the Battle of Tumbleton, the market town of Tumbleton was betrayed by Sir Ulf Light and Sir Hugh Hammer, who had the dragons Vermithor and Silverwing burn the town. The Greens then sacked the town and executed blacks who surrendered. Sir Hobart Hightower was the most senior Hightower remaining in the Green Army, as his cousin, Lord Ormond Hightower, had been killed in the previous battle. Prince Daeron Targaryen, sickened by the sack of Tumbleton, ordered Hobart to put a stop to the victor's behavior, but Hobart failed to do so. Ulf and Hugh were reluctant to help Daeron advance towards King's Landing. Lord Unwin Peake wanted to wait until the Greens were reinforced by Lord Boros Baratheon, while Hobart Hightower decided to retreat to gather supplies from the Reach. The Greens' inaction caused their great host to slowly dissipate through desertion and disease. After hearing of unrest in King's Landing against the rule of Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen, younger nobles such as Sir John Roxton, Sir Roger Corn, and Lord Peake called for the advancing on the capital, but Hobart preached caution and 2 betrayers remained stubborn. When Hugh crowned himself king and had his men attack Roger, 13 loyalists known as the Caltropes plotted against the 2 baseborn dragon riders. Meanwhile, the baseborn dragon rider Sir Adam Velaryon, whom Rhaenyra had condemned after hearing of the 2 betrayers, was resolved to defend his honor by retaking Tumbleton from Ulf and Hugh. He fled from King's Landing atop sea smoke, and allegedly sought counsel from the Green Men on the Isle of Faces. Adam set out to recruit a new army for the Rivermen, by visiting every castle, great or small, and scraping together survivors of previous battles, along with old men and young boys. A brave and charming young man and glib of tongue, Adam succeeded in convincing many lords to contribute what aid they could. Due to a combination of being impressed by his dragon and being terrified of what green victory in a war would mean for them after the horrific sack of Tumbleton. Among them were Benjicott Blackwood, the 12-year-old lord of Raventree Hall, whose father had died at the Battle of the Burning Mill, and who later fought in the fish feed. Sabetha Viprin, widowed lady of the twins, whose husband, Lord Frey, had died fighting in the battle by the lakeshore, who was now also joined by her father and brothers from House Viprin. Lord Stanton Piper and Lord Joseph Smallwood, who had survived defeat in the earlier battle at Acorn Hall. Lord Derek Derry, leading the survivors of Castle Derry after Vhagar burned it, killing the original Lord Derry, and Lord Lionel Deddings, Hugo Vance, the new Lord of the Red Fork, came with 300 of his own men, plus Black Trombo's company of Myrish sellswords. Hugo and Trombo had earlier fought in the Butcher's Ball, destroying Sir Criston's trapped army. Most notably, House Tully finally joined the war, with its army full strength and fresh. Seasmoke's arrival at the fate of Tumbleton finally convinced the reluctant Elmo Tully to end their neutrality, against the wishes of his bedridden grandsire Lord Grover Tully. Altogether, Adam called together a new army of rivermen of nearly 4,000 strong. On the day which the Caltropes had decided to enact their coup against Ulf and Hugh, the Greens in Tumbleton were awakened in the night by the sound of battle. Though Adam's 4,000 rivermen were outnumbered, they had the advantage of surprise. Columns of knights attacked from the north and the west, while archers fired their arrows. Seasmoke's dragonfire burned the Greens' camps outside of Tumbleton, as well as buildings in the town which had survived the earlier attack. Ulf White slept through the battle with the Body Badger, an inn in Tumbleton. Hugh Hammer rushed to the stables so he could ride Vermithor, but he was slain by one of the Caltropes, Lord John Roxton. Prince Daeron the Daring died amongst his camp west of the town, although his method of death is disputed. The Blacks tried to kill the sleeping Silverwing and Vermithor in the fields south of Tumbleton, but failed to do so. The riderless Vermithor slew 200 of knights who attacked him, and took to the air and fought indiscriminately. Lord Stanton Piper and Lionel Deddings were burned by the dragon. Adam and Seasmoke had been battling Daeron's dragon Tessarion in a nimble fight. When Adam saw the raging Vermithor, he redirected Seasmoke to a larger dragon. Lord Benjamin Blackwood believed that Vermithor would have torn Seasmoke to pieces, but Tessarion suddenly joined the brawl, and all three dragons fought. Vermithor slew Seasmoke, but then collapsed and died shortly after. Tessarion failed to take flight 3 times, so Lord Blackwood had his best archer, Billy Burley, mercy kill the Blue Queen. The battle ended at dusk. The Blacks were victorious in the Second Battle of Tumbleton, but their victory was incomplete. Although the River Lords lost less than 100 men and slew more than 1,000 of Hobbert Hightower's Green Army, the Blacks failed to retake Tumbleton. King Aegon's Green survivors retreated into Tumbleton and sealed the gates. The Blacks, lacking siege equipment, retreated during the night after the battle. 3 of their 4 dragons had died, with only Silverwing surviving. The Caltropes continued their plotting against Ulf White. Hobbert and Ulf died from drinking poisoned wine. Lord Unwin Peake succeeded Hobbert as commander, but the great host, which had marched from Old Town, was racked with plundering deserters. Lord Peake led the remainder in a retreat from Tumbleton, ending the Green threat to King's Landing. Apart from the losses in dragons, the battle was a decisive victory for the Blacks, with under 100 men lost compared to over 1,000 Greens killed, despite their numerical superiority. Ultimately, the battle was also a strategic victory for the Blacks, given that the disintegrating of the Hightower army had to withdraw back to the south. Even so, while Adam's sacrifice had saved King's Landing from the Hightower army, the Blacks had lost control of King's Landing itself anyways. When, due to fear at the approach of the Hightowers, the city was plunged into chaotic riots. Lord Grover Tully passed away shortly after Second Tumbleton, allowing Sir Elmo Tully to briefly become the Lord of Riverrun. The mostly intact River Lord army of nearly 4,000 regrouped at Riverrun, where Elmo continued to gather more men, including the Mallisters and the Brackens, until within about 2 months of their combined forces increased to nearly 6,000 men, and they marched east to face the Baratheon host in the Battle of the Kingsroad outside of King's Landing. Rhaenyra Targaryen was refused entry at Rossby and was allowed to stay only 1 night at Stokeworth. Half her gold cloaks deserted on the road, and attackers killed several of her knights. At Duskendale, they were admitted, but not allowed to stay long. Refusing to part from her son Aegon the Younger, and without ships, Rhaenyra sold her crown to buy passage on a Braavosi ship. She returned to Dragonstone, hoping to hatch a new dragon from the island's dragon eggs. Sir Alfred Broom and his garrison killed Rhaenyra's remaining men, and captured the Queen, her ladies, and Aegon the Younger. Once inside the gates, Rhaenyra faced Aegon II Targaryen and the wounded Sunfire. Aegon the Elder fed Rhaenyra to his dragon, while Aegon the Younger looked on, with the chance that Rhaenyra's loyalists would continue the fight in her son's name. Aegon the Younger became a hostage. It was the 22nd day of the 10th month of 130 AC. On the 9th day of December, Sunfire the Golden died on Dragonstone. After this, Aegon started planning his return to King's Landing. Though Rhaenyra had died, her cause lived on. Aegon II would sit the throne again, but this would only last another half a year. The Moon of the Three Kings, also called the Moon of Madness, was a period in 130 AC near the end of the Dance of the Dragons, when there were multiple monarchs in King's Landing. These included a preacher, the so-called shepherd, and 2 pretender kings, Trystane Truefire, a hedge knight squire, and Gaemon Palahair, the son of a whore. Despite its name, the period lasted longer than a month. King Aegon II escaped King's Landing during its fall to Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen, his half-sister and rival monarch. Rhaenyra ruled the city for only half a year, before she abandoned King's Landing in the aftermath of riots during the 5th moon of 130 AC. Although he did not declare himself king, the shepherd, the man who had instigated the storming of the Dragon Pit, commanded a mob of tens of thousands from the Dragon Pit on Rhaenys Hill. He advised his followers to cast aside their possessions and live more humbly, but his influence began to wane. Sir Perkin the Flea, a hedge knight and leader of the rioters, claimed that his squire, Trystane Truefire, was a bastard son of the late Viserys I Targaryen, the father of Rhaenyra and Aegon. After Rhaenyra fled King's Landing, Sir Garth the Harelip surrendered the Red Keep to Perkin, who then installed Trystane on the Iron Throne. Perkin executed Garth and Sir Harman of the Reeds, among other knights, and he forced Mysaria to be whipped naked through the streets, which caused her death. Perkin spared Septon Eustace and freed all the prisoners held in the Red Keep's dungeons, including Grand Maester Orwell, Lord Corlys Velaryon, and Sir Tywin Lannister. Queen Dowager Alicent Hightower was likewise freed from her confinement. Perkin was aided by Lord Larry Strong. The second pretender king was Gaemon Palahair, the 4-year-old son of Essie, a whore who claimed the boy had been fathered by Aegon II. Given Aegon's philandering ways, this did not seem as improbable. Gaemon ruled from the House of Kisses atop Visenya's hill, and gathered thousands of followers. He issued a series of edicts, including a declaration that females should be equal to males in matters of inheritance. Mushroom claimed that these edicts were almost certainly the work of Sylvania Sand, a Dornish whore and a paramour of Essie. Aegon II, hiding on Dragonstone, recuperated from injuries suffered at Rook's Rest. With Rhaenyra on the mainland, Aegon's Greens took her castle through the fall of Dragonstone. In the 10th moon of 130 AC, Rhaenyra was killed by Aegon's dragon Sunfire, when she returned to Dragonstone. Sunfire succumbed to his own wounds in the 12th moon of that year. After mourning Sunfire, Aegon II readied plans to recover the Iron Throne in chaotic King's Landing. Lord Boros Baratheon led men from the Stormlands to bring order to the capital on the king's behalf. Sir Perkin was imprisoned, and Trystane Truefire was executed once Aegon took the city, though not before he received the boon of knighthood. Essie admitted that Gaemon had been the son of an oarsman from Lys, and was hanged. Gaemor Palahair was arrested, but then accepted into Aegon's household. Aegon had the shepherd's tongue torn out, and then the king had the shepherd and his most devoted followers burned to death. The Battle of the Kingsroad, called the Muddy Mess by those who fought in it, was the last battle of the Dance of the Dragons. It took place between the Greens and the Blacks on the Kingsroad, not far from King's Landing. Despite the death of Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen, there were still those who fought against King Aegon the Elder. Lord Boros Baratheon, who had been reluctant to face the dragons in a war personally, had seized King's Landing during the Moon of the Three Kings, and restored the city to Aegon's rule. He had gathered an army of nearly 6,000 men to Storm's End earlier in the war. Lord Elmo Tully had gathered nearly 6,000 men to Riverrun, including Lord Benjicott Blackwood and his aunt Black Aly, Lady Sabitha Frey, Lord Hugo Vance, Lord Jorah Mallister, Lord Roland Derry, and Lord Humphrey Bracken. Command passed to his son Kermit Tully after Elmo had died during the march. With a host of rivermen marching towards the city, Boros decided to march with his strength against all that remained of Rhaenyra's forces. In the last days of the war, Boros joined by levies from Duskendale, Hayford, Rossby, and Stokeworth, houses that had originally sworn to Rhaenyra but bent the knee after Aegon defeated them and took political hostages. Boros was also supplemented with 2,000 poorly armed levies scraped up from the alleys of Flea Bottom. The Baratheon army was larger and unbloodied, but conversely was less experienced. Boros had cynically delayed his forces from taking any meaningful action against Rhaenyra's field armies in the entire war up to that point. The army of Rivermen may have been smaller, but it was more battle-hardened. Some of them survivors of every major battle in the Riverlands since the beginning of the war, particularly the Blackwoods, who had fought in the battle by the Burning Mill, the massive battle by the Lakeshore, and the Second Battle of Tumbleton. The two forces met on the Kingsroad 2 days away from King's Landing, where the road passed between a forest and a hill. The ground was muddy after several days of rain. Unafraid of the boys and women leading the rivermen, the confident Lord Boros Baratheon led the charge at dusk. Positioned on the hill, Alisane Blackwood's longbowmen broke Boros' cavalry charge, and the disorganized riders who managed to reach the rivermen's shield were slowed by the mud. The Baratheon infantry nearly broke through the shields, but they were then attacked in the flank from the forest by Benjacob Blackwood. The soldiers from Hayford, Rossby, and Stokeworth refused to join the fight, and the rabble from Flea Bottom fled the field. The knights from Duskendale switched sides outright by attacking the Stormlanders in the rear. Although he was able to kill numerous men during the battle, including Lords Rosalind Derry and Jorah Mallister, Boros had been wounded several times before he faced Lord Cormant Tully, the Lord of Riverend killed in the Lord of Storm's End with his Morning Star after Boros refused to surrender. The lads Kermit Tully, his brother Oscar, and bloody Ben Blackwood advanced on King's Landing, as they were only a stone's throw removed from the city. New armies supported the Prince Aegon the Younger were also advancing, as Lord Cregan Stark was marching down the King's Road with his own host, leaving the tidings severe for King Aegon II. Aegon the Elder had lost the war, which was plain for those advising him, but not to the king himself. Lord Corlys Velaryon, now serving on King Aegon's small council, advised him that the only remaining option was to surrender and take the Black. King Aegon refused, and gave orders to have the ear of his nephew Aegon the Younger cut off as a warning. King Aegon was carried back to his chambers in his litter, but when the litter arrived and the curtains were lifted, the king was found dead, the blood on his lips, having been poisoned. The hour of the wolf followed once Cregan reached the capital. With King Aegon II Targaryen dead, Aegon the Younger was crowned as King Aegon III Targaryen. Although Aegon II's host had been defeated by the Velaryon fleet once more served the Iron Throne, the period that followed was named the False Dawn. The realm faced numerous problems. The cruel winter that had begun the year before on Maiden's Day of 130 AC would last until 135 AC. Much of the realm had been burned out by dragonfire, in particular Aemon Targaryen's one-man war-riding Vhagar, which had burned out most of the Riverlands. Broken men and outlaws roamed the countryside in the hundreds of thousands, and public order had collapsed in many places. The Ironborn, now under the command of Dalton Greyjoy, who had anomalously died with the Blacks as a pretext to attack wealthy green kingdoms, now refused to acknowledge the boy King Aegon III's commands to stop raiding. Lord Cregan Stark and his northern army of childless, homeless, and younger men had marched to King's Landing with hopes of adventure. The sudden death of King Aegon II had robbed them of that chance, leaving Cregan furious. He had wanted to punish Storm's End, Castle Rock, and Old Town for having supported King Aegon over Rhaenyra, but upon his arrival, Lord Corlys Velaryon had already sent out ravens suing for peace. So what did you guys think of the entire Dance of the Dragons compilation? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you haven't already, please be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.